There's a machine the size of a refrigerator that makes electricity with no flame, no turbine, and no moving parts at all. It runs on the same gas line that feeds your furnace, and it delivers roughly twice the usable power per unit of fuel that the grid sends to your meter. Google bought the first ones in 2008. Ferrari runs a factory on them. In 2026, Oracle ordered enough to power a small city. It was designed for Mars. Start with what's actually inside it, because there is almost nothing in there. No piston, no crankshaft, no bearing, no belt, no fan blade in the generating stack. Nothing rubs against anything. A backup generator in your garage has hundreds of moving components, every one a candidate for failure, which is why it needs oil changes and test runs and eventually a rebuild. This machine has no such list. What it has instead is a thin ceramic wafer, roughly the size of a drink coaster, made largely of zirconia. Engineers screen print a layer of specialized ink onto each side, one facing the fuel, one facing the air, then bake the whole thing in a kiln. It's called a solid oxide fuel cell. Feed natural gas or hydrogen across one face and ordinary air across the other, then heat the wafer to about 800 degrees Celsius, close to 1470 Fahrenheit. At that temperature, the ceramic does something most solids can't. It lets oxygen ions pass straight through it. Those ions cross the wafer, meet the fuel on the other side, and the reaction strips electrons loose. Those electrons can't follow the ions back through the ceramic, so they take the only path available, out through an external circuit. That flow is your electricity. The wafer isn't a battery storing charge. It's a doorway that only lets traffic move one direction. Now compare that to every power plant you've ever seen. Burn something, boil water, push steam through a turbine, spin a magnet inside a coil of wire. Heat, to motion, to current. Every link in that chain loses energy. The burning loses some. The steam loses some. The spinning loses some. By the time it reaches your outlet, roughly a third of the original fuel survives as usable electricity. You pay for the whole fuel. 2/3 of it left as heat before it ever got near your house, and a little more vanished as resistance in the wires on the way. Here's the part that decides the economics. Most fuel cells you've heard of need platinum as a catalyst, and platinum runs over $30,000 per kilogram. Solid oxide cells run hot enough that they need no precious metals at all. Ceramic and metal oxides. That single design choice is the difference between a laboratory curiosity and something you can manufacture by the thousand. In 2024, Bloom Energy hit 60% electrical output on hydrogen, a number that rivals a full-scale combined-cycle gas turbine, from a box you can park in a loading bay. Silence follows directly from having no moving parts. Researchers at the National Fuel Cell Research Center at UC Irvine have tested these systems for years, and the center's director, Scott Samuelson, has said the quietness is what customers struggle to believe. People stand in front of a running unit and assume it must be switched off, because their entire mental model of power generation is tied to noise. A gas turbine announces itself from 100 yards away. This does not announce itself at all. Which is exactly why one of these could be installed at the Ferrari factory in Maranello, Italy, in 2024, without anybody in the building noticing the noise. The equipment landed at an Italian port on May 12th. The system was fully operational by June 16th. 5 weeks. Dock to power. In much of America, the interconnection queue for a large industrial customer is measured in years, and that single fact is quietly rearranging how big companies think about electricity. Google was customer number 1. In 2008, 4 100-kilowatt units arrived at the Mountain View headquarters, each roughly the size of a large refrigerator, together producing 400 kilowatts of continuous, silent, on-site power. By 2010, eBay had 5 units running and reported saving $100,000 in electricity in the first 9 months, with 15% of its daily power coming from fuel cells. Apple, Walmart, FedEx, AT&T, Bank of America followed. 25 of the Fortune 100 now run them. Then the numbers went somewhere the residential energy world simply doesn't operate. Bloom has deployed 1.5 gigawatts of low-carbon power across more than 1,200 installations globally. In April 2026, Oracle signed a master services agreement for up to 2.8 gigawatts of these systems for its AI data centers. Brookfield committed up to $5 billion to finance deployments. In the first 90 days of 2026 alone, roughly $7.65 billion in data center fuel cell contracts were signed. But the deal that tells you the most is the smallest sounding one. In January 2026, American Electric Power finalized a $2.65 billion 20-year agreement for up to 1 gigawatt of capacity to serve a 900-megawatt data center in Wyoming. Read that again. A regulated electric utility, a company whose entire business is selling grid power, signed a 20-year contract to buy fuel cell electricity because the grid it operates couldn't serve the customer fast enough. That's a utility admitting, in writing, and with money attached, that its own infrastructure can't keep up. Bloom's own 2026 survey of data center decision-makers found respondents expecting one-third of data centers to run fully off-grid by 2030. And the chemistry underneath all of this was published before the Model T. A German physical chemist named Walther Nernst worked out in 1899 that zirconia doped with certain metal oxides conducts oxygen ions at high temperature, and won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1920. Swiss researchers Emil Bauer and H. Prize built a working solid oxide fuel cell in 1937. So why did it take until 2008 to get one into a parking lot? Materials that survive 1470 degrees Fahrenheit continuously, for years, without cracking are not trivial to make, and millions of identical wafers is an industrial problem rather than a science one. But the rest of the answer runs through a NASA mission that never flew. In the 1990s, K.R. Sridhar was a professor of aerospace and mechanical engineering at the University of Arizona, and NASA hired his lab with a problem attached. Astronauts on Mars would need oxygen to breathe and fuel to get home, and hauling all of it from Earth wasn't possible. The Martian atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide, so the obvious move was to make what you need after you land rather than carry it. Sridhar's team built a device that ran solid oxide electrolysis in reverse of a fuel cell, feed it electricity and Martian carbon dioxide, and it splits that carbon dioxide into breathable oxygen and carbon monoxide. Same yttria-stabilized zirconia ceramic that sits inside a commercial unit today. It passed every test NASA put it through and was scheduled to fly on the Mars Surveyor 2001 lander. Then NASA canceled the mission. Sridhar was left with proven hardware and nowhere to send it. That's when he saw it. If the ceramic could use electricity to pull gases apart on Mars, it could run backward on Earth and pull electricity out of gases. Same wafer, same chemistry, opposite direction. He told Businessweek in 2009 that he quit his NASA work because he believed the technology could change the world. He founded Ion America in 2001, renamed it Bloom Energy in 2006, and then went quiet for 8 years, building and testing in near total secrecy, before emerging publicly in 2010. And in 2010, on a stage, he made a promise with a specific dollar figure attached: $3,000. That was the price he said a home fuel cell would reach within 5 to 10 years. If you've enjoyed the video so far, we'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, because the next thing I want to cover is what a working home unit actually costs in the 2 countries that already have them. 16 years later, that $3,000 home unit has not arrived. A Forbes investigation reported that not a single American home has a Bloom box installed. Not one. Including, notably, Sridhar's own multi-million-dollar house in Woodside, California. The man who promised the home unit doesn't have one either. The reason isn't a conspiracy, and it isn't the physics. It's 4 specific constraints, and the 4th one has nothing to do with the machine at all. The first is price per watt. Commercial units run roughly $7 to $8 per watt, which puts a 5-kilowatt home system at $35,000 to $40,000 before installation, and the payback stretches well past a decade. But the reason that price hasn't fallen is the interesting part. Solar modules got cheap because hundreds of millions of identical units got manufactured. Fuel cells never had that volume in the residential market. And without volume, there's no cost curve, and without a cost curve, there's no volume. That loop has held for 16 years, which means it's a manufacturing problem, not a physics one. And manufacturing problems break. The second is that these things don't like being turned off. Running at 1470 degrees Fahrenheit means startup takes hours, sometimes most of a day, and the ceramic doesn't appreciate repeated heating and cooling cycles. They're built to run continuously, month after month, at steady output. That's ideal for a data center that never sleeps, and awkward for a house whose demand swings by a factor of 5 between 3 a.m. and dinner time. And this is not a backup generator, which matters more than it sounds, because it means the machine isn't competing with your generator at all. A generator is built for bursts. This is built for permanence. The third is emissions honesty. Running on natural gas, a solid oxide fuel cell still produces carbon dioxide, meaningfully less than a coal plant, because skipping combustion and skipping transmission losses means less fuel per watt delivered, but not zero. What it genuinely does eliminate is the rest of the combustion byproducts, since there's no flame producing the nitrogen oxides and particulates a burner throws off. On pure hydrogen or biogas, the carbon emissions drop to near nothing, and neither of those arrives at American houses. The stacks themselves also have a service life measured in years rather than decades, which is why commercial customers buy service agreements rather than just hardware. The fourth is the tax code. For years, the federal investment tax credit offered 30% on fuel cell installations, but the residential credit was capped at $500 per half kilowatt. On a small home system, that's maybe $1,500 back. The solar credit, by comparison, was uncapped, routinely returning $5,000 to $10,000 on a typical rooftop installation. Same government, same stated goal of clean distributed energy, wildly different treatment. Fuel cells weren't excluded because they failed a test. They were an afterthought in the tax code because no lobbying network pushed for parity. Layer on interconnection rules written for solar rather than for continuous baseload generation, permitting offices that have never processed one, and utilities with no financial reason to welcome a box that eliminates a customer's demand entirely. And you get exactly what we have. A technology that works, deployed by the thousand, never once pointed at an American house. The residential version isn't hypothetical, though. It exists. It just doesn't exist here. Japan has run a government-backed residential fuel cell program since 2009, with hundreds of thousands of units installed in private homes, each generating around 750 watts continuously, plus hot water from the waste heat. 750 watts sounds small until you realize it isn't meant to run your dryer. It's meant to erase the floor of your bill. The constant draw your house never stops pulling, hour after hour, all year. In Europe, Viessmann sells a residential fuel cell heating system, producing roughly 750 watts of electricity alongside heat, with German government grants covering a substantial share of the purchase. The difference between those countries and this one isn't engineering talent or gas supply. Japan's subsidy structure did something specific and smart. The government covered roughly half the purchase price early on, then reduced the subsidy in step as manufacturing volume brought the retail price down. That's how you break the loop where high price prevents volume and low volume preserves high price. Two countries made the same technology affordable by deciding to. So what does this mean for you specifically, standing on your own property, in 2026? If you own a farm, a shop, a small commercial building, or any property with a natural gas connection and steady year-round demand, the commercial systems are available now, and you don't have to buy the hardware outright. Power purchase agreements through financing partners let you pay for the electricity produced rather than the box itself, which moves the whole thing from a capital expense to an operating one. The smallest deployments still start above household scale, so this is a genuine option for a business rather than a residence. But if you're running a facility with a real load, this is a phone call worth making. If you're a homeowner with a long-term view, The thing to watch isn't Bloom. It's whether anyone builds a genuinely residential-scale solid oxide unit for the American market, and whether the tax treatment ever reaches parity with solar. The technology gap closed years ago. What's left is a policy gap and a volume gap, and both of those can change faster than physics ever does. If a manufacturer announces a home unit, check first whether it says solid oxide, because the cheaper proton exchange membrane systems sold online generally require pure hydrogen rather than natural gas and have considerably shorter service lives. And if you're deciding right now where to put money for energy independence, the honest comparison is this. Solar plus storage costs less, qualifies for better incentives, and has an installer on every other corner. What it doesn't do is produce power at 2 a.m. in February without a battery bank sized for the job. A fuel cell does exactly that, continuously, from a fuel line you probably already have, at roughly double the delivered output of the grid. One of those technologies got a policy escort into the American market, and the other didn't. And that difference, not the engineering, is why one is on 4 million roofs and the other is in Ferrari's factory. So here's my question for you. If a residential fuel cell showed up tomorrow at $15,000 installed, running silently on your existing gas line, would you put one in and cut the utility out of your baseline power entirely? Or would you rather put that same money into solar and batteries and keep the fuel bill at zero?